Alright, what's going on everyone? Zombies here again, and today we've got another video about which abilities and equipment you should be leveling first for your mercenaries, just so you know which are, the most important to get leveled up there, and which ones you don't really have to worry about until you're really trying to max them out. So, for our first protector here, we have Alextrasa. So, Alexstrasa hasn't seen a whole ton of play in the meta. She's definitely a character I think could get better if more dragons get introduced. So with her abilities, I think you kind of want to put equal priority on leveling Dragon Breath as well as Dragon Queen's Gambit. Those are just like probably the abilities I use the most with her, and they seem the best to me. Then we also have Flame Buffet. Basically, it's not a bad ability, but right now there are pretty much only like 3 dragons in the game, one being Alexstrasa. Then you have Brightwing, and then Voon also summons a dragon summon. So I think those are the only 3 dragons in the game, so it's kind of hard to trigger that if you control another dragon part of the ability, so I wouldn't worry about that one as much. When it comes to her equipment, I think the best one's probably Alexstrasa's Brooch, because dealing more damage just seems like a really solid way to go. But I don't think the other ones are necessarily bad either. There's definitely some merit to Amulet of Swiftness for sure, because turning that ability from a 5-speed to a 1-speed seems really good. The only downside is it is 2 cooldown, which is pretty slow. So I think the Brooch is probably the way you want to go on that one. Next up here we have Cairne Bloodhoof. So he is obviously an all-star. If you've been playing any amount of Mercenaries since launch, you have probably seen a fair amount of Cairne, and that's because he's just one of the best protectors out there. So in terms of leveling his abilities, the ones you really want to be focusing on are definitely Earth Stomp and Endurance Aura. That's basically what you're spamming like 98% of the time. You just rotate between Earth Stomp and Endurance Aura, whichever is better for that turn, getting taunt, speeding up your dudes, or dealing some AoE damage and slowing your opponents for the next turn. They're both really strong, really insane abilities that are super popular in the current meta, so I definitely recommend leveling those 2 first. And then his last ability, Ancestral Uppercut, that's just kind of his basic attack. Sometimes it's relevant at the very, very end of the game, but most of the time you're not really using that, so I wouldn't worry about leveling that one up quite as much. And then for his equipment, just far and away, Reincarnation is the best ability by a mile. The fact that you get to respawn once you die with 40 health is just honestly insane, and is probably a huge reason why so many comps are running Cairne outside of his speed manipulation abilities, which are both great. So he just has like super amazing abilities, and those are the ones I definitely recommend leveling up first, because you're going to use them the most in PvP. Then we have Cariel Roame. So with her, Cariel, I really like leveling. Honestly, all her abilities are good, but I think Seal of Light and Taunt are definitely the 2 most important ones. When I've been using Cariel time or 2, basically having that Taunt on turn 1 is really freaking huge. Especially, it seems to do pretty decent with countering Samura leads. So definitely recommend leveling Taunt up, because you get increased turns where you're taunted, and the health is really nice. And then Seal of Light is also fantastic, just because the healing and the attack buff can be really good, especially if you use it on yourself. Heal back up, you're taunting with more attack, dealing more damage, just really solid over around. Crusader's Blow is also not bad though. The nice thing about that is if you actually do manage to get off that death blow, you do restore a bunch of health to your mercenary, which can be very clutch, but like other death blow abilities, it can be kind of hard to trigger that sometimes. When it comes to her item, I think it's pretty obvious to me that the most best one is Tome of Light, just because when I am using her, most of the time I'm taunting her, and that taunt lasts for multiple turns, so getting that +8 attack is really, really nice, because she's taunted most of the time anyway, so it basically almost doubles her attack, which is really relevant sometimes. So that's what I recommend for item-wise. And we have another Roame here. We have Cornelius Roame. So I haven't used a whole ton of Cornelius myself, just because I feel like few other protectors have been the ones I've really been enjoying. Haven't got a chance to level him too much yet. But if I had to say prioritizing for him, I think what you really want to level up, probably his taunt ability, because taunt and heal is really good. That's usually a lot of the time you're running a protector, it's for that. So that's definitely one you probably want to focus on there. And I think the Martial Master seems pretty good too. Gaining health, maybe some bonus health if you're hitting another fighter. And there are a fair amount of fighters in the meta, so that could be pretty decent. However, it is a little bit slow. That's the only downside about that ability. Don't really like his last ability a whole ton, so I probably wouldn't recommend leveling that until like the very end. Then when it comes to his equipment, it's kind of tough to say, but I think probably would just go with the Shield of Dawn. Taking any amount of less damage passively can be really big. I've seen that with, especially against something like a Diablo AoE, where you're taking the same amount of damage multiple times. That can be actually very strong. So that's why I think I'd end up going with for him. Next we have our first Orc of the bunch, Garrosh Hellscream. So for Garrosh, far and away his most important abilities, he's definitely all about the Orc synergy. So Battle Shout is really big, buffs him, buffs your other Orcs, and gets an attack in, 3 speed, so it's nice and quick. And then Horde Strength is also really huge, because gaining taunt and that additional health just enables your Garrosh to survive for a much, much longer time, especially if your opponents are kind of trying to leave him alone or ignore him. And then lastly, Mac Gora. Basically, that's also important. Honestly, all of his abilities are important to level, so I'd probably just recommend doing them kind of evenly. Try and get them all to at least level 3 or higher before you try to max one out, because they're all kind of important. Because this enables him to deal more damage by making the dude he attacks attack him back. When it comes to his equipment, I think Tusks of Mannoroth is probably the best one here, just because that extra health off of Horde Strength is really, really relevant. And that's probably been Garrosh's best ability, at least when I've been using him, because sometimes you can just gain an obscene amount of health, especially if the opponent has some summons, so they have more than just their 3 mercenaries on the field. So that's what I like for Garrosh. And we have another Hellscream here, Grommash Hellscream. So Grom, I think, unfortunately, he doesn't seem quite as powerful as Garrosh, but he still does some interesting stuff. For his ability, I think Staggering Slam is probably the best one, just because speed manipulation is so key in the current meta. It's really all about, who's faster in a lot of scenarios, so guaranteeing the next ability to be slowed by a bunch is pretty good. 4 speed isn't bad. Then next, probably would just go with Battle Fury, just because gain some extra attack, which is always very good, and you can damage multiple enemies. And Blood Fervor, it's really just, basic attack, so I don't think there's a whole lot of point in leveling it, because I think all that really levels up is either the speed or the Death Blow, both of which aren't super relevant because it's a slow ability anyway, so I wouldn't worry about that one quite as much. When it comes to his abilities, though, because of how Staggering Slam is by far his best ability, I think Halting Slash makes the most sense, because it turns it from 10 damage to 15 damage, which can definitely be relevant sometimes, especially if you're hitting super effectively against a green unit. Next up, we have one of my personal favorite units in Gruul. Gruul is an awesome unit, and for him, his abilities aren't the most insane in the world, but they're really not bad either. I think for leveling him, you really want to focus on Dragon Slayer Shout in terms of your abilities, because that's the ability I find myself using the most often. because Gruul doesn't have to physically attack them, so he takes less damage, and it's 4 speed, so it's pretty quick. Next, probably would go with his summon, just because getting it to be a 15/15 is pretty important. Obviously, it's bigger if your opponent controls a dragon, but dragons are pretty scarce right now, so I haven't found that to be relevant yet. Obviously, if dragons do become relevant, Gruul's going to be like even more insane. So that would be really cool, and I do expect there to be more dragons eventually. Lastly, Crazed Flurry. It's a good ability, but I find it's by far the one I'm using the least amount of the time, so I wouldn't really worry about leveling that one up so much. When it comes to his equipment, the one you really want more than any of them is definitely Dragon's Skull. That basically every time I've used Gruul, it has been as a pseudo Diablo counter, because Diablo spams his AoE, deals a lot of damage. Well, if you got Gruul in the field, instead of dealing 6 per tick, it deals 1. So that's kind of crazy. A lot of people I've run into have not really been expecting that. So really good. Definitely the passive I recommend for Gruul over all the others. Then we have King Mukla. This unit's awesome. Seen him a lot in beast compositions. For him, I think the most important ones that you probably want, all his abilities are good, so you don't really want to slack on any of them. But dinner time is definitely really big, because you want to make sure you have that fast speed for taunt if you need it. Then next up, I think it might be a tie between Primal Power and Banana Frenzy, because they're both really solid, good abilities. You don't need them to be maxed for Mukla to be good, but obviously he will be better the higher up you get them. But they're both, I'd say it's kind of even priority-wise, because you do want to make sure Mukla is doing decent damage and buffing your guys, and you also want to make sure you can give that bonus attack and immune while attacking when you're using him in a beast comp with like King Crush, who's your main damage dealer. In terms of his equipment, Mukla's big brother is like by far the best ability, so much better than just buffing kind of what your bananas give as buffs. Spawning that 12/24 taunt is super huge. It's really kind of one of the things that makes the beast composition as strong as it is at times, especially with Rexxar's passive on the field, giving it another +4/+4 at max level. So that's really huge. One of the things that makes beast comp really solid. So definitely recommend focusing on that one in terms of his equipment. Next we have Kurtrus Ashfallen. So he is kind of he's almost another Diablo counter, or I've seen some people trying to use him as one. I haven't tried him out too much myself, but I just finished leveling him, so I'm going to be trying him out soon. But the main ability that I think you want to focus on with him is I-Beam, just because it's solid damage, doesn't involve him directly hitting an enemy, so he won't take as much damage, and the health can be really, really nice, because healing, I think, is very underrated in the current meta. It's very important if you can get away with it. Then with his next abilities, probably Aimless Aura is probably better, I would say, than Demon Slayer, just because Demon Slayer, the nice thing it has going for it is it is a fast attack, but you obviously are going to take damage, and you're not seeing a whole ton of demons outside of maybe Diablo, so you're not going to gain that +6 attack super often, whereas with Aimless Assault, it is a random enemy attack, but, if it is the left or rightmost, you do get that immune this turn, so potential for just getting some damage without taking damage. You got, 2 out of 3 to win those odds, so that's pretty okay, but definitely I think I-Beam is the one you want to focus on the most. And then when it comes to his equipment, I think just making sure that I-Beam deals 6 extra damage with Chaos Amulet is probably the best one. If you have some kind of Fel composition going, I think it could make sense to go with Fel Blade, so that way you start building up your Fel damage if you're spamming the move. Seems pretty alright. And then Demon Guard, it could be interesting if more demons start showing up, but given the current meta, I don't think it's really needed. Next we have Jaraxxus. So speaking of demons, we got Lord Jaraxxus here. With Jaraxxus, he's another protector that hasn't seen like a whole ton of play yet, so it's a little hard to say what his strengths are. But I think what you want to be leveling on him is mainly Legion Burst, as well as Fell Infernal. So it looks like you'd be wanting him in a Fell or Demon composition type situation, and just getting that damage up for Legion Burst seems really solid overall. It is a little slow, but it deals a fair amount of damage, and obviously if you get that Death Blow, you get a little bit of extra damage in there, which is kind of nice. And Fell Infernal, it's always decent having a spawn around. It can make things kind of difficult for your opponents and buffs your spell ability. Fell abilities. Buffs your fell abilities. And lastly, Fist of Jaraxxus. Pretty okay. I guess if you're going like all in on demons, this move could be really strong and maybe you want to focus it. But I haven't really tried out demon comps, so I'm not 100% sure about what is best in that regard. Probably depends how and what you're running. And then when it comes to his equipment, I think you probably want either True Strike Gauntlets or Felcore. Those seem like the two best ones to me. Pretty decent, making your fist always target the lowest health enemy instead of having to rely solely on RNG. And then Fell Infernal gaining additional Fell damage could be really good if you're running a lot of Fell spell abilities. So probably pick one of those depending on what you are running with it. Then we have Malfurion Stormrage. So he's super popular in nature comps. Basically, the main abilities you want to be focusing with on him, definitely max out Cenarian Surge, as giving that 3 speed faster abilities to your friendly units. Nature abilities are just super duper huge. That's honestly one of the main reasons people run Malfurion. He's just so good with that. His second best ability would probably be Entangling Roots, as that can be really clutch if you make yourself faster. Rooting an enemy, make sure he won't be able to attack if it's like a physical based attacker. So that's really, really good. And then Archdruid's Call is also not bad either, dealing some nice AoE to enemies or double that in restoring health to your characters. But I think it's the one I've used the least in PvP, so I'd probably worry about that one last. And then when it comes to his items, I think far and away the best item here is Life Root Staff. Just if you're running Malf, you're probably running him in a nature comp, so you're triggering his passive a lot of the time, which can really snowball if your opponent makes a mistake and decides to leave him alone. So definitely Life Root Staff is the one you want to level first for him. Yeah, we've got another demon, Mannoroth. He's another... Demons really haven't seen too much play yet. They could be good eventually. I don't know. I think a lot of people just haven't really leveled them, so they haven't really tried them out a whole ton. But when we look at his abilities here, it's kind of interesting how he has a reduce the attack of all enemies by 15 this turn. That's that could be really powerful if the meta starts changing to a more melee combat focus. But right now there's a pretty big mix. I don't think that would be super duper needed. And we've got Fell Lash. Preventing healing has a lot of strong potential. Right now I don't think there are a lot of super popular healing comps. There are a few running out there, but not too many. So I think that's another reason he's been kind of underutilized, but definitely a good ability there. Solid damage, decent speed, and the bonus effect is nice too. And then Terror Charge, attack an enemy, give your demons plus 8 health. So if you're running him in a demon comp, probably would prioritize that, I think, just because 8 health is a lot of health. And it's just a decent regular attacking move. So out of all those, probably Terror Charge and Fell Lash are the two that I'd probably focus on the most. Unless for some reason it becomes a very melee focused combat meta. With his item, well, it's kind of hard to say, but I think you would want to either Pit Lord Staff or Fell Spikes. They just both seem rather good. I mean, all of them are pretty okay. Even the last one there, Fell Enhanced Lunge, is pretty decent if you were in that meta like I was talking about. But given the current meta, I'd probably, if you do want to use him for some reason, I'd probably go with the plus health with Pit Lord Staff and try and make some kind of weird demon composition. Now we have one of my favorite protectors in the game in Ragnaros the Fire Lord. So honestly, all of Ragnaros' abilities are really good. In terms of what you want to prioritize, it depends on how you're running Ragnaros. What I recommend if you're running him in a fire comp, you do definitely want to get Magma Blast leveled first, as you're usually comboing him with Antonidas or another faster fire unit. So you do want to make sure you're getting that fire combo off whenever possible, because it does deal a lot of damage. But honestly, all three of his abilities are really good and really important in PvP. So I would recommend just kind of leveling them evenly and just kind of gradually working your way up there, because they're all just really good. Die Insect is really great at the end of the game, because sometimes you can get some multi-kills, and Meteor is just really solid damage, and depending on positioning, you can get some really nice bonus damage off on other units, as well as abilities are really good. When it comes to his equipment, this is another instance where it's going to depend on what kind of composition you're running him in. If you're running him in a mostly fire-based comp, I definitely recommend Blazing Rune, as the +3 passive to fire damage is pretty big, because that obviously affects all your units, can make them deal a whole lot more damage. But I have seen some comps that have been running Rag as kind of a back-end protector to kind of clean up the opponent's units at the end. In that case, you probably want Sulfuras, as preventing freeze is really insane, because there are a lot of Vardens running around. So if one of them freezes you or tries to freeze you or gets this death rattle off, freezes a unit, you throw a Rag out, you're unfrozen. It's really clutch. Plus 20 health is also really nice. Makes it so he's a little bit harder to kill. So that's what I recommend for Ragnaros. And we have another personal favorite of mine in the Lich King. So with the Lich King, the abilities you probably want to focus on leveling first are Frostbite is by far his best ability, just because when you combine it with one of his equipment, it just enables perma-slow on basically all your opponent's units a lot of the time, which is really huge. Speed is very important right now, so Lich King is really good at that. Death Coil is also pretty important as well, though. The healing that gives and being able to kind of snipe a unit without taking damage with it is really big. So I think Frostbite first, Death Coil close second, and lastly, Frost Shield. It can be good sometimes. Sometimes taunting your Lich King up can be very clutch, but it is definitely it's definitely one of those situations where you don't really need to level it because you're not using it in a lot of games. But it's good to level it when you can, because sometimes the speed on it can be relevant. In terms of equipment, by far best equipment, Frostmourne. It's just enabling his Frostbite to hit 3 characters instead of 1 with the slow ability is just actually insane, and pretty much the main reason I run the Lich King a lot of the time. So I definitely recommend running that one. Alright, and our second to last mercenary here is going to be Thrall. So with Thrall, it kind of depends on how you want to use him. If you're using him in a nature comp, I definitely recommend upgrading Lightning Storm first, because I'm sure you're going to be using that a lot. If you're using him in a more orc-focused comp, or a comp that's not really about either of those things, I definitely recommend For the Horde, as giving him plus attack, and any other orcs you might have is pretty good. And then lastly, you got War Chief's Command. Deal 12 to an enemy, your leftmost character attacks it. So that can be pretty good, but I think it is probably the weakest of the abilities, unless you're going like full in on orcs. So I'd probably go For the Horde and Lightning Storm first, and then get War Chief's Command a little bit later. When it comes to his equipment, like 9 out of 10 times you want Doomhammer. Doomhammer is just absolutely nuts. +4 attack and Wind Fury. Wind Fury is just absolutely insane on characters in Mercenaries, in my opinion. And we saw a lot of Thrall in the early meta. Haven't seen quite as much of him recently, but I do not think that makes him a bad mercenary. I just think people haven't been experimenting with them quite as much as they could or should be. His other items aren't really bad. It's just Doomhammer is just far and away the best one, so that's the one I would recommend using for him. Last but not least, we have Varian Wrynn. Pretty decent, cool human unit. I could definitely see him showing up in some human compositions down the road, but he hasn't been super popular in the beginning. Definitely, I think his best ability is Heroic Leap. Deal 14 damage to an enemy. Your other humans are permanently 1 speed faster. That just seems like he has a lot of potential to snowball. I do think if we are going to see a humans comp eventually, he could definitely be an integral part to it, and Heroic Leap would be why. Then Retaliation, probably the one you want to do second. After an enemy attacks this turn, attack it. Again, this is one of those abilities that could probably be pretty good if we're in a very attacking focus meta. Then lastly, Splitting Strike. Honestly, you really don't have to level this one that much because I believe just makes it a little bit faster, or it might just buff the death blow, or both. But either way, it's just an okay attack. Nothing really super special about it, so I wouldn't prioritize leveling that one first. When it comes to his equipment, I really like giving either the Charlemagne for +7 attack, because attack is never a bad thing to have, or Bounding Boots if you're going to be using Heroic Leap a lot. Dealing 5 more damage, making it almost 20 damage is really big. That's a lot of damage. So I think that is what I would recommend for him, depending on how you want to use it. Bounding Boots if you're running him in like a human comp, and Charlemagne if you're just kind of running him on something kind of different. So that's going to be our last mercenary here. So I hope this was kind of helpful. I'll be doing one more of these just to finish off with the fighter mercenaries. So hopefully this is useful, gets you an idea of, what abilities you should be prioritizing with your coins, so that way you can be using them in PvP without having to, fully max them out. So that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.